special day today is. And I'm not talking about the Super Bowl. A couple of groans out there. No, it's a special day because we're here to celebrate the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord. And I love these kind of special. It's neat because normally Sundays, every Sunday is a solemnity. And so if there's another feast day that happens to fall on a Sunday, Sunday always takes precedence because every Sunday is ranked as a solemnity. It's the highest ranking feast day in the church. But the Feast of the Presentation on February 2nd is one of those days that supersedes a Sunday, even if it falls on a Sunday. So today we would ordinarily be celebrating the fourth Sunday of Ordinary Time, right? But nope, Feast of the Presentation of the Lord comes in and kind of bumps that out, so we get to experience some of these things like the blessing of the candles and the procession in, and everyone likes having their candles. We have the mood lighting in the church. We're doing the blessing of the throats with St. Blaise, and all these beautiful traditions. I was at the Spanish Mass last night, and they have a devotion with the Divino Niño, the child Jesus, and before Mass they had this statue of the child Jesus, and they were dressing him in royal robes and a crown upon his head, and they were putting them in the throne, and it's just beautiful. And then I walk into the church with Father, and there's like 6 child Jesuses, around the altar, because everyone has one for their family, and they want to have it blessed, and they want to have it taken into their homes. And so there's all these traditions around this day, kind of like Christmas, right? And we get excited about these traditions. And in fact, in many parts of the church, historically, Christmas was celebrated until today. The Christmas season lasted from December 25th until February 2nd, the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord. And it's not hard to see why. Because once again, in our gospel readings, we find ourselves back with Mary and Joseph and the infant Jesus. And they're traveling from Bethlehem to go to Jerusalem 40 days after Jesus' birth. That's why this is February 2nd. We celebrate this 40 days after Christmas, to present their firstborn son in the temple as required by the law of Moses. There were ritual requirements around the birth of a firstborn son. But is that all that's going on here, right? Do we celebrate this special feast with all the fanfare and the extra candles and all of this stuff just because the Holy Family was fulfilling some requirement of the ritual? Right? No, there's more to it than that. There's a meaning here for us to take from these events. And to help us understand the deeper meaning, I want to consider this event from the perspective of each member of the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And we'll begin with Jesus. Jesus is the firstborn of the new creation, but he's also the firstborn son of Mary. And according to the law of Moses, as given in Exodus, every firstborn male had to be ransomed or had to be redeemed. Right? He had to be bought back. That's what it means to be ransomed. He had to be bought back. Why? Well, in Exodus, if you go back and read this, and Moses is telling the people that every firstborn, not just their sons, but even among their animals and livestock, every firstborn male animal had to be offered as a sacrifice. And every firstborn male human had to be redeemed with a sacrifice. They would sacrifice an animal. They would sacrifice a lamb or something to buy back the firstborn son. And Moses said, when your sons ask you why, you tell them that this was the price of our freedom from Egypt. The Hebrews' liberation from slavery in Egypt cost the life of every firstborn male child and animal among the Egyptians, right? The last of the plagues. He said that was the price for our liberation, and that's why we have to ransom, we have to redeem all of our firstborn. But notice that Luke doesn't say in the gospel that Jesus was ransomed or redeemed. That's what the law in Exodus says has to happen, but Luke doesn't say that. Because, of course, Christ doesn't need to be redeemed. Christ is the Redeemer. Christ doesn't need to be ransomed because he is the price paid for our ransom, the price of our freedom. But Luke does say that he is consecrated. He is presented. That's why we call this the feast of the presentation of the Lord. And that verb to present also means to offer. He's offered. He's brought into the temple and he's offered as if he were a sacrifice. After leaving the sanctuary of his mother's womb, the infant Jesus journeys in the desert of this world for 40 days until he enters the sanctuary of his Father's temple. And there he is offered to God for our redemption. This is a foreshadowing of the sacrificial offering that he will become for you and I on Calvary, when he once again will leave the comfort of his mother's embrace and offer himself to God on our behalf. And what about his mother? What role does she play in today's feast? Well, let's go back to the law of Moses. The law of Moses says that a mother is considered unclean for 40 days after giving birth. Now, this has to do with all of the ritual purity laws that the Jewish people had to observe in the Old Testament. And blood was one of the things that could render you unclean, ritually unclean, unfit for worship. You had to be purified if you came in contact with blood. That's why one of the requirements of kosher meat is it has to be drained of all of its blood. And childbirth involves a lot of blood. I've seen it. If you don't believe me, ask your mama. It involves a lot of blood. And so every mother, after giving birth, was considered ritually unclean for 40 days, after which time she is to make a sacrifice for her purification. And that sacrifice, according to the law of Moses, was a lamb as a burnt offering and a turtle dove or a pigeon as a sin offering. But if you were a poor woman, you didn't have to offer the lamb. If you were a poor woman, you could just offer 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. And that's what Mary offers. She offers 2 turtle doves. So she offers a poor woman's offering. But is Mary poor? Is she poor? Is that a trick question, Deacon? Yes. No, she's materially poor. Yeah, she's materially poor. But spiritually, she's richer than anyone. She's also more pure than anyone. Just like Jesus doesn't have need to be redeemed because he is the Redeemer, Mary has no need for purification. She is the Immaculate Conception. She is more pure than anyone, but yet she submits herself to the law out of humble obedience. Just like Jesus submits himself to the law out of humble obedience to the Father. So Mary comes and she offers the poor woman's offering of 2 turtle doves. But she doesn't come to the temple without a lamb. She brings a lamb for sacrifice, doesn't she? Because she brings her son, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Like I said, she is spiritually more rich than anyone. And so the lamb that she brings for her sacrificial offering is the most worthy of the lambs. And that's why when Simeon takes this child from her arms, he knows that he's receiving that spotless lamb for the sacrifice. And so he tells Mary that her child will be a sign that will be contradicted. And you yourself a sword shall pierce, he tells her. He predicts not only Jesus' passion, but Mary's compassion. Compassion, that word means to suffer with. And so Mary, the mother of sorrows, becomes the model of compassion for all of us who worship a God who suffers with us. We are all called to that compassion, to share in the suffering of those that we love. But what about the last member of the Holy Family? What about St. Joseph? Our bishop, Bishop Jugas, has declared this year, 2020, to be the year of St. Joseph in the Diocese of Charlotte. And that's why we were doing this special 7 Sunday devotion to St. Joseph. If I can scratch my head and figure out other things we can do over the course of the year to honor St. Joseph, we'll do that as well. We want to focus on St. Joseph in a special way this year. And so I wanted to end my homily by reflecting on this silent member of the Holy Family. Our gospel reading mentions Joseph twice. So he's in here. He's in this story, but he never says anything. Both of the times that he's mentioned, it's in conjunction with Mary and Jesus. We're told first that Mary and Joseph took Jesus up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. And then after Simeon makes his proclamation, we're told that the child's father and mother were amazed at what Simeon tells them. But we're not told anything else that Joseph did, and we're not told anything at all that he said. But he's there, and he's obedient, and he's amazed. That's what we're told. Joseph had a unique perspective within the Holy Family, and that is the perspective of fallen man. He had the perspective of fallen man. Both his wife and his son were free from original sin. Jesus, his son, as the Son of God, was sinless, and Mary, our faith teaches us, was conceived by a special grace from God without original sin. But Joseph's nature was fallen, the same as you and I. That means Joseph has committed sins, same as you and I. Now, he was a righteous man, and so he struggled against that fallen part of his nature, but it was a struggle for him. Virtue was something that he had to work at. He was aware of his faults. That's part of what made him a righteous man, that awareness of his own failings and shortcomings. He was aware that he didn't always trust God the way that he should, even and including when his very Savior was conceived in the womb of his betrothed. He had doubts. What was that journey to Jerusalem like for Joseph? He's doing what he's supposed to do out of obedience to the law. He's taking his wife to the temple to be purified 40 days after she gives birth, even though she's already more pure than any other human being since Adam. He takes his son to the temple to be redeemed as the firstborn, even though his son is the redeemer of the world. He takes his son into the temple fully aware of whose son this really is, and fully aware of whose house he is taking him to. What was that like for Joseph? His son, as man, will be obedient to the law. His son, as God, is the lawgiver. But Joseph will have to teach him the law. His son is God-made man. But Joseph will have to teach him how to be a man. His son will become strong and grow in wisdom. He will grow strong by working at Joseph's side, and he will grow wise by watching and following the example of his mother and his father. And St. Joseph is probably thinking, well, I don't need to worry about the example of his mother. But what's he going to learn by watching me? Do we need to wonder why St. Joseph is silent? What could you possibly say? What could he possibly say? If I imagine myself as St. Joseph looking at that child being carried in the arms of that mother, the only words that enter into my mind are, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof. When we contemplate Jesus as the object of our worship, as our God, or when we reflect upon Mary in her purity as the object of our devotion, we're like St. Joseph. How can a sinful man stand to live that close to perfect charity? I mean, it's like the prophet Malachi says, who will endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? Malachi doesn't say that because the Lord is bad or frightening or horrible or anything. It's not that. It's just he's so good. He is so good. Which one of us could endure that? And yet that's where Joseph found himself. Right there at ground zero, in the midst of that perfect love. And that is where you and I are called to be, to live with Christ, not just in our homes and in our families, but to live with Christ in our hearts. And the only way that we can do that we can stay that close to such perfect beauty and goodness, is just to cling to it with all of our might and never let it go, to never let anything get in between us and the love of Christ, because we know that we are nothing without him. That's what St. Joseph had to do. That's what you and I have to do. There's a tradition that I actually recently discovered while I was looking for an image of St. Joseph for our chapel. We have most of the iconography we have at our chapel is Eastern in origin, and so I wanted something Eastern to kind of match the tone. And I couldn't find any icon just of St. Joseph. I was looking for a nice icon of St. Joseph, and I could not find one. And I looked at all my favorite icon suppliers, and I looked at my non-favorite icon suppliers, and I couldn't find any image of St. Joseph that was done in an Eastern style. You can find all kinds of Western art for St. Joseph. But then I found out why. There's a tradition among the sacred art of the Eastern Christians that they never show St. Joseph alone. They never show him by himself. He is always shown either with Jesus or as part of the Holy Family with Jesus and Mary. They will not depict him alone. And I thought, that's fitting. That is as it should be. Because it's like St. Joseph himself telling us, I'm nothing without Jesus. Don't you dare show me without Jesus, because I am nothing without Jesus. I am no one except who I am to him. And so it should be with us. We are nothing without Jesus. The only thing that should matter in your life is, who am I to him? So as we enter more deeply into this year of St. Joseph, let us ask for his protection. Let us enter into his silence. Let us learn from his wisdom. And let us follow his example in never being seen apart from Christ.